The story begins in the cold darkness as an old king lies dying on his bed and a whole kingdom holds its breath. The once great King David is now just a shivering old man unable to keep himself warm. Everyone in Jerusalem profoundly understands the cruel truth that the king's death will ignite a fierce war for the throne. Among David's sons is an arrogant prince named Adonijah who harbors an intense thirst for absolute power. Adonijah has no intention of waiting for his father to pass away and unilaterally prepares chariots and guards to show off his prestige. He hosts a lavish feast outside the royal city and invites all-powerful men to honor him as the new king. The shouts of "Long live the king" echo across the hills but deliberately ignore those loyal to David. Most notably, he completely excludes the presence of a younger brother named Solomon. This action is a malicious plot because years ago David swore an oath before the Almighty that Solomon would be the successor. The prophet Nathan immediately recognizes the deadly danger lurking and rushes to Queen Bathsheba. He urgently warns her that if Adonijah actually seizes the throne, both she and Solomon will certainly be executed. Bathsheba hurriedly enters the king's gloomy chamber to remind him of his past oath and report Adonijah's rebellion. She utters bitter words that when the king closes his eyes in death, she and her son will be treated as condemned traitors. At that exact moment, the prophet Nathan also enters to confirm all the conspiracies unfolding just outside the palace doors. Anger awakens the warrior instinct of the dying old king lying under the heavy layers of blankets. David gathers his last remaining strength to issue an ironclad order that will determine the entire future of the kingdom of Israel. He commands his courtiers to immediately place Solomon on his own royal mule and head to the spring of Gihon. At that sacred spring, the priest pours holy oil on the head of the teenager Solomon to officially anoint him as king. The sound of the trumpet tears through the tense atmosphere, marking the moment the true king of Israel officially steps onto the historical stage. Tens of thousands of people pour into the streets, cheering and dancing with such joy that their sound seems to shake the earth. That frantic noise echoes back to Adonijah's feast like a bucket of ice-cold water thrown straight at the rebels. A breathless messenger runs in carrying the bad news that David has given the throne to Solomon and the whole city is celebrating. The festive atmosphere at the banquet instantly turns into a dead silence and extreme terror envelopes everyone. The powerful guests hastily flee for their lives into the night to escape the wrath of the new king. Leaving Adonijah all alone to flee in panic to the tabernacle, desperately clinging to the horns of the sacred altar to beg for his life. On the very first day of his reign, the young King Solomon faces a life-or-death decision involving his own brother. Solomon demonstrates calculated mercy by promising to spare Adonijah's life as long as he proves his loyalty. Not long after, King David breathes his last after delivering weighty final words about keeping the laws of the Almighty. Solomon officially holds the throne, but true peace is only established when he ruthlessly eliminates the remaining seeds of rebellion. Adonijah makes a fatal mistake by daring to ask to marry the late king's last concubine as a way to implicitly reclaim power. This time Solomon shows no mercy and immediately orders the execution of his ambitious brother to firmly consolidate the dynasty. With the throne secured, the young king goes to the hilltop of Gibeon to offer thousands of burnt sacrifices in reverence. It is on that very night at Gibeon that the Creator appears in a dream and grants Solomon a privilege unprecedented in human history. He declares that Solomon can ask for anything he desires and he will immediately grant it to him. Imagine the moment the Almighty gives a young man the power to possess infinite wealth or the lives of all his enemies. But Solomon's answer astonishes heaven and shapes the entirety of his great legacy thereafter. He humbly admits that he is just an inexperienced child facing the heavy responsibility of leading an incredibly massive nation. Solomon asks neither for wealth nor power, but only for a discerning heart to distinguish between good and evil. The Almighty is immensely pleased with this selfless request and decides to grant him a superhuman wisdom surpassing all the greatest minds. Not only that, he also grants him the ultimate glory and boundless wealth that he never even asked for. He promises to give him a long life on one single condition: he must faithfully walk in the ways of the Almighty. Solomon wakes up and realizes that wisdom has flooded his mind like a blinding light that had never been there before. The first great test of the king's wisdom appears in the form of two prostitutes fighting over a single child. They bring one living baby and one dead baby into the palace with fierce accusations against each other. The first woman tearfully recounts that the other accidentally rolled over and killed her own child in the night, then secretly swapped the two babies. The second woman fiercely denies this and loudly claims that the healthy living baby belongs to her. This is a completely deadlocked case as there are no witnesses or evidence to determine who is telling the truth. The whole court holds its breath, waiting to see how the young king will solve a problem that seems to have no solution. Solomon unexpectedly orders a sharp sword to be brought and coldly decrees that the living child be cut in half and divided equally between the two. A horrific silence blankets the royal hall as the gleaming sword is raised high, ready to strike down the tiny innocent life. At the exact moment the blade is about to fall, the true birth mother screams in tears, begging to give the baby to the liar so her child can live. Meanwhile, the fake woman cruelly agrees with the verdict to cut the child in half so that neither of them will have it. With just a sword and a threatening word, Solomon completely exposes the truth hidden deep within maternal instinct. He immediately orders the sword to be lowered and hands the baby safely back to the true mother who was ready to sacrifice everything for her child. The story of this shocking judgment spreads like a rapid storm throughout the entire kingdom of Israel. The people begin to look at the young king with absolute awe because they realize the guiding light of the Almighty's wisdom dwells within him. From that day on, Solomon's reign enters the most brilliant golden age that history has ever witnessed. The wise king composes thousands of proverbs and countless songs with profound knowledge covering everything from plants to beasts. His fame spread so far that monarchs from all over the world send envoys carrying silver and gold just to hear him speak. Wealth pours into Jerusalem in such massive quantities that silver becomes as common as pebbles rolling on the streets. The country lives in prosperous peace and every family dwells securely under the shade of their own vines and fig trees. Having everything in his hands, Solomon embarks on the greatest project of his life, building a magnificent temple for the Creator. He mobilizes a massive labor force of hundreds of thousands of men to quarry giant stones and the finest cedar wood. Strangely, every stone is perfectly finished far away so that no sound of an iron hammer or any noise is heard at the sacred construction site. The temple slowly rises in absolute reverent silence as a testament to the peak glory of Solomon's dynasty. The entire temple is paneled with rare wood and overlaid with a layer of brilliant pure gold that blinds anyone who enters. Inside the most holy place stand two giant golden guardian angels spreading their wings to cover the Ark of the Covenant. After 7 grueling years of construction, the most spectacular architectural marvel of the ancient world is completed, waiting for its most sacred moment. Solomon summons all the people and the elders to Jerusalem to bring the Ark of the Covenant into its eternal resting place. The moment the Ark is set in place, a blinding cloud of the Almighty's glory envelopes the entire temple. That cloud is so brilliant and thick that the priests collapse under the sheer weight of the divine presence. Solomon kneels before the entire nation and offers a humble prayer that reaches the highest heavens. He acknowledges that even the highest heavens cannot contain the greatness of the Creator, let alone a temple built by human hands. That night, fire from heaven descends and consumes the sacrifices as a seal of eternal approval for Solomon's devotion. The wise king seems to have touched the absolute pinnacle of dazzling glory that any mortal being could ever achieve. The great fame of Solomon spread to the farthest lands of the ancient world. It reached the ears of the Queen of Sheba, who ruled a rich kingdom of gold and spices in the south. She could not believe the rumors about a king of such ultimate wisdom and wealth, so she decided to verify it herself. The queen brought a massive caravan loaded with jewels and the hardest riddles human intellect could devise. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, she poured out all the most difficult questions in her heart to test the king. Solomon answered them all easily and perfectly, as if all the truths of the universe were already in his mind. The Queen of Sheba was overwhelmed looking at the gold-plated palace, the food on the table, the attire of his officials, and the majestic stairway to the temple. That greatness made the most powerful woman of the south hold her breath and exclaim that the rumors she had heard were not even half the truth. This was the absolute pinnacle a mortal being could reach in the ancient world. The wisest king of humanity possessed the most brilliant palace and was revered by rulers all over the world. There was no higher step for Solomon to climb. And it was exactly at this dazzling peak that the old story quietly turned into the darkest and most painful tragedy. Right after recounting his immense glory, the biblical epic records a sentence carrying the saddest words, "But King Solomon loved many foreign women." The man who could solve every riddle of humanity could not solve the fatal weakness in his own heart. It all started with seemingly harmless political compromises when he married foreign princesses to secure peace. A diplomatic marriage did not seem like a wound, and 10 marriages would not collapse an empire. But Solomon did not stop. He continued to marry women from the very nations the Creator had strictly forbidden. The Almighty had clearly warned not to intermarry with them because they would surely turn the king's heart to worship false idols. Despite his superhuman wisdom, Solomon threw himself into those affairs and raised the number of wives and concubines to 1,000. You cannot love 1,000 women bringing 1,000 different cultures and religions while keeping your heart whole. The downfall did not happen with a terrifying thunderclap or a shocking act of rebellion. It happened in silence through the smallest whispers of compromise every day. A wife missed the gods of her homeland and asked the king to build a small shrine. The king, blinded by love, nodded in agreement, and then another wife demanded the same. And so, as Solomon grew old, his wives successfully pulled his heart away from the Creator. His heart was no longer fully devoted to the Almighty like his father David's had been. That is how a great man falls, not by dropping straight into the abyss, but by sliding down through 1,000 inches of small compromises. He still worshipped the Creator, but he no longer worshipped him exclusively. And to the Almighty, half a heart is the same as complete betrayal. Things got so bad that the very hands that once spread wide in prayer and built the holy temple now built altars for idols. Right on the hill facing the gold-plated temple, Solomon erected shrines for pagan false gods. He built altars for the goddess of Sidon, the god of Moab, and the evil god of Ammon, who demanded followers to burn their own children alive. Imagine the wisest king who once tearfully begged God to have mercy on foreigners, now standing building an altar to a child-eating demon. The incense smoke of pagan filth rose and mingled with the smoke of the holy temple in the very same city. The ultimate wisdom he asked for to distinguish good from evil was now intentionally rejected by him in his final years. The Creator was furious with Solomon because he had betrayed his oath, despite him appearing twice and warning him directly. The Almighty appeared a third time, but this time it was no longer a promise of blessing but a death sentence for the dynasty. He declared he would tear the kingdom away from Solomon and give it to one of his servants. However, remembering the loyalty of King David, he would not do it during Solomon's lifetime. The sentence would be executed during his son's reign, and he would leave only one tribe for David's line for the sake of Jerusalem. It is bitter to know that the only thing holding back the doom of the wisest king's family was the legacy of his father. Even while Solomon was still on the throne, the seeds of division began to crack from within. Hostile forces in the north and south simultaneously rose up after decades of slumber. Most dangerously, a talented young official promoted by Solomon himself was prophesied to take 10 tribes of Israel. The great empire that had never been defeated in battle was now cracking from within due to the king's own sins. Solomon sat alone in his magnificent palace, surrounded by thousands of concubines and priceless treasures, yet he felt utterly empty. In the final years of his life, he looked back at all the wealth, projects, and pleasures he had pursued. The king used his brilliant mind to pass a final judgment on all human efforts and ambitions. He bitterly cried out that everything is meaningless, utterly meaningless. The word he used in the original language means a breath, a vapor that appears for a moment and then vanishes when the sun rises. Everything he chased, everything he gained when held in his hands, was ultimately just a futile chasing after the wind. The king who had everything a human could desire looked straight through the earthly glory and realized it was just a mirage. But Solomon's wisdom did not stop at complete despair. At the deep bottom of meaninglessness, he found a single truth that never vanishes into smoke. He summarized his entire life's contemplation with a haunting piece of advice to fear God and keep his commandments. That is the whole duty of man, for every deed, no matter how hidden, will be brought into judgment. Ironically, the only thing that remained meaningful was the very thing he had dropped at the peak of power. The young man who once knelt at Gibeon asking for wisdom was now an old man standing among pagan altars, refusing to use that wisdom to save himself. He could recognize a fake mother with a sword but could not recognize fake idols with a lifetime of warnings. Solomon died after 40 years of reign and was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. Immediately, the great kingdom was torn in two when his son rejected wise counsel and ruled the people with brutality. 10 tribes rebelled and broke away to form a new kingdom, exactly as the Almighty had prophesied. The story of the wisest king in history does not end with a triumphant song but with a bitter warning written in his own tears. But this story is not just an old page of history from 3,000 years ago, it is a mirror reflecting your own life. Outstanding talent never equals faithfulness, and being brilliant does not mean you will not fall. Talent can take you to the peak of glory, but only character and obedience will keep you there. A downfall is never a massive leap but always begins with countless small compromises that you delude yourself into thinking are harmless. Do not wait until you have everything in your hands to bitterly realize that what fills the void in your soul is not material wealth. Your soul was not made to contain the world, it was made to contain the Creator. The Bible promised that a greater Solomon has come into the world, and that is Jesus Christ. Solomon built a temple of gold that was destroyed, Jesus promised to rebuild the spiritual temple with his resurrected body in 3 days. Solomon lost his heart to 1,000 lovers, while Jesus sacrificed his life to save a sinful humanity. Whether you are yearning for the peak or feeling empty amidst your wealth, remember it is never too late to turn back and walk with the one who commands the wind.